Yo, what's going on guys, it's Cynical and welcome back to another video. Today for you guys, I wanted to talk primarily about Star Wars and Kingdom Hearts 4. And although as of right now it's not absolutely concrete as to if Star Wars is actually going to be a world in Kingdom Hearts 4, from what we've seen in the Kingdom Hearts 4 reveal trailer, it suggests that it's very likely that that forest environment is in fact the moon of Endor. Now, this could just be any normal forest, as forests generally tend to look very similar to one another, right? There are some key characteristics, though, about the forest of Endor to that of the forest environment that we're seeing here in the trailer that are very similar. For one, Endor consists of a lot of redwood trees and ferns. In this forest environment in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer, the same can be said. The footage of Endor that you guys are seeing is from Star Wars Battlefront 2. I wanted to go through it myself, specifically the Endor portion of the beginning of the game, the campaign, to sort of get a feel of what we saw in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer to compare that to the campaign mission of Endor in Battlefront 2. Recently, I've come across a really good comparison image that was done by Twitter user Mark, which compares Star Wars Battlefront 1 from 2015 as well as number 2 from 2017, showing off the Endor environments in both of those games, comparing it to the environment we see in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer, specifically comparing it to the Waterfall scene. In both Endors for Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, there are waterfall environments in Endor that look very similar to that waterfall scene that we see in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. Especially the Star Wars Battlefront 1 waterfall here in Endor, when you compare that side by side to the Kingdom Hearts 4 waterfall in the forest, it almost looks one-to-one. Now, of course, even if these are the same environments, it's not like they're going to be absolute one-to-one with what we're seeing here in Star Wars Battlefront. But no doubt, if this is in fact Endor, I would say it's very likely that Square Enix have likely used Star Wars Battlefront and its Endor that appears in those games as a point of reference. These are probably the best versions of Endor to actually use as a point of reference that currently exists in modern media. Rather than going back to Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, yeah, sure, they'll likely end up using that if in fact Star Wars is in, but to get a true scope and sense of exactly the environment down to a T that's already been recreated in a game engine, I would say Square Enix would likely use the help of EA to get pointers towards how to make a accurately represented version of Endor within a game engine. I tried to find the waterfall that appears in that screenshot within Battlefront 2, but I could only come across this specific waterfall here, which in fact I don't think is the same one. Still though, just roaming around Endor in Battlefront 2, you obviously get very similar vibes to the environment that we saw in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. And obviously, if of course Endor does get into the game, the representation for Endor will look something very similar to what was represented in Star Wars Battlefront 2. I was really trying to do my best while going through Battlefront 2 and Endor, studying all of the foliage and vegetation and comparing it to the vegetation and plants that we see within that Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. I almost felt like David Attenborough doing some kind of plant study. And yeah, like I mentioned, most video game forest environments tend to all look very similar to one another. As I was saying, this forest environment could really just be any forest environment. But really, when you do start to compare all of the vegetation, like specifically the ferns, the redwood trees, and even the other bushy looking plants that are around the place, they're very similar to all of the different other vegetation and plants that do appear within Endor when we're specifically looking at Battlefront 2, and even when you start to compare it to the source material seen in Return of the Jedi. I think though, rather than the environment in itself, as it's just too early to say if this really is Endor, the biggest giveaway or hint at this point that we actually have towards this being Star Wars is, of course, like we've talked about, that piece of metal that appears in this scene, looking extremely similar to an AT-ST foot. The two-legged machines that the stormtroopers operate whilst in Endor. Now, years back, I was totally against the idea of ever seeing Star Wars included into Kingdom Hearts. I was always on that boat of it must be either Disney Pixar or Walt Disney Animation. I don't want all of these other acquired companies and studios and their IPs starting to dribble into Kingdom Hearts. But specifically when I look towards something like Star Wars, when you really do look at the themes of Star Wars and see how it almost perfectly parallels the themes that obviously Kingdom Hearts represent, with the whole light darkness thing going on. It's almost too perfect. And with the amount of variety in the sense of level design that something like Star Wars would be able to introduce into Kingdom Hearts, I think honestly this would serve as an extremely badass world. I also have to look at this from a business and marketing standpoint. I think if Star Wars were to be put into Kingdom Hearts, this would quite possibly be the absolute biggest inclusion a Kingdom Hearts game has ever had. Previous to this, I would say that if we look at Frozen and Toy Story, these are probably the biggest IPs that have ever been put into a Kingdom Hearts game, and likely have garnered a lot of additional attention towards the game. However though, if you look at Star Wars, that specifically has its own incredibly massive fandom, spanning from since the 70s with an already extremely dedicated fanbase, though one that's been chucked through the ringer over the past few years specifically. Yeah, it would certainly garner a lot of outside attention towards Kingdom Hearts, and for those who have previously never had interest in Kingdom Hearts, but are massive Star Wars fans, no doubt they'll likely end up giving whatever Kingdom Hearts game has Star Wars a chance. Mark my words that if we do get Star Wars into KH4 and that there is a Star Wars trailer, which likely there probably will end up being to give a nice showcase on the Star Wars inclusion, that will hands down be the most viewed Kingdom Hearts video trailer of all time. And honestly, at this point, I really couldn't think of a bigger Disney IP that would bring more attention to Kingdom Hearts than Star Wars. They've also got Marvel there, which totally is also a possibility for Kingdom Hearts 4. But comparing to any other Disney inclusion, yeah, Star Wars would absolutely have to be the biggest, and probably the most exciting reason for a newcomer to play Kingdom Hearts 4. I want to bring up a piece from Nomura that was conducted in an Ultimania interview, with Nomura talking about the inclusion of outside Disney properties from the likes of something like Marvel or Lucasfilms. The question here was, the Disney group has also added Marvel and Lucasfilms to its lineup, so the possibility of future worlds to choose from has increased even further. Nomura said that's right, however, in order to change those properties into a game, contracts must be made with each company separately, and there are cases where other game companies already have contracts, so although the Disney group has indeed added those properties, incorporating them into Kingdom Hearts isn't so simple, essentially meaning that if any other company or game studio currently has an already existing contract with a specific outside Disney property for the likes of something like Marvel or Lucasfilms related, then in order for Square Enix to try have usage to those IPs, it's all the more harder. At this stage, EA currently have the contracting rights to be able to use Star Wars in video game usage. This is an agreement between both EA and Disney. So not only would it mean that Square Enix would have to, of course, arrange meetings with Disney, but they'd also have to sit down with EA as well. However though, because this was a commonly asked question throughout Kingdom Hearts 3's development as to whether or not the likes of outside Disney properties would ever find their way into an eventual Kingdom Hearts game, like Star Wars or Marvel, this really could be something that Square Enix have really been trying to work hard towards actually getting into a future Kingdom Hearts game for the past few years now. And I really do believe that this Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer is actually evidence of that. I think though, if we were to have one or the other when looking towards Marvel or Star Wars, I personally would lean more towards Star Wars. Its themes just make too much sense, paralleling that of the themes that are already existing in Kingdom Hearts. Well, you could probably argue the same for Marvel films as well. I think the prominent theme of light versus darkness is all the more stronger for Star Wars compared to something like Marvel. I think also too, unless Disney are really wanting to go all out on Kingdom Hearts 4, because it really does seem like they've got a lot more trust and faith in Square Enix and the Kingdom Hearts brand as a whole nowadays. Yeah, they might likely give Square Enix free reign over both properties. It seems like it is a strenuous task to get the usage rights to at least just one of these outside properties. I think it's likely we'll only end up seeing one, and that one being Star Wars. I also should mention too that Nomura's done some work towards Star Wars, not just that, but also Marvel and DC in the past before too. Back in 2015, Tetsuya Nomura ended up designing these really amazing looking Play Arts Kai figurines for Star Wars, and previously he's also done the same for Marvel as well as DC. This is his own personal take on the design of Darth Vader, Boba Fett, as well as a Stormtrooper, and I'll also make sure to put up some other pictures here of the Marvel and DC ones. I specifically really love this version that Nomura designed of Batman. So because Nomura has designed quite a few of these things, it really does go to show that Nomura himself does have interest in both Star Wars and Marvel. Personally, I would love to see these designs actually incorporated into Kingdom Hearts, Nomura's own take on the designs of some of these beloved characters that appear in these outer properties. However, though, that being said, while that would be cool, I can imagine they would remain and respect the source material. It's also worth mentioning that back in 2013, the year that Kingdom Hearts 3 was unveiled, as well as the same year that Lucasfilms was acquired by Disney, Nomura was interviewed at Japan Expo. The question was talking about how Kitase-san, who is one of the Square Enix directors for, of course, Final Fantasy VII Remake and many other previous Final Fantasy games, is a fan of Star Wars. This needs to essentially be added to Kingdom Hearts. Nomura followed up saying, "We're not going to decide whether or not Kitase-san likes Star Wars or not, but we've been talking about Star Wars itself since it became Disney's content recently." When I heard the news, I was like, wow, yeah, obviously it's going to be great if we could add it, but like I said, there are a lot of restrictions and rules by Disney, so we don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, we'll see. So obviously Tetsuya Nomura has had this idea of Star Wars being included into a Kingdom Hearts game for a little while now, obviously since Disney has acquired the rights to Lucasfilms. Now also because I feel like Disney is so much more lenient when it comes to Kingdom Hearts, and that I think going forward there will probably be more creative freedom when developing these games, as it just seems like recently with all of the Kingdom Hearts representation that's been going on, with also Sora getting into Super Smash Bros. Last year, and the massive success of Kingdom Hearts 3 being the most successful Kingdom Hearts game so far, I certainly think that Disney are going to be a little bit more on board with the Kingdom Hearts brand moving forward, and that the restrictions and rules that Nomura was talking about in this interview might not so much apply as hard as they once did back in 2013. Keeping in mind too, around that time as well, Star Wars was only a freshly acquired IP. Disney probably didn't want to do anything too crazy or rash with their newly acquired IP straight off the bat. I think though, if we do get Star Wars in Kingdom Hearts 4, the Star Wars that we're probably looking at receiving is going to be from the original trilogy. If of course this is Endor, then Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, personally to me makes the most sense. The OG trilogy is 100% the most iconic from the Star Wars franchise. If it's going to be in Kingdom Hearts, you've got to have those iconic characters, like of course Obi-Wan, who could appear as a Force Ghost. We have Luke, Leia, Chewie, Han, Emperor Palpatine, and of course Darth Vader. Endor was first introduced in Star Wars Episode 6, and while it has appeared in other forms of Star Wars media, most of the movie actually takes place on Endor, and so this is probably why, if we're going to get Star Wars in Kingdom Hearts 4, and with them maybe possibly teasing Endor here in this trailer, I'd say Episode 6 is likely to be the chosen movie that will act as the game's story for KH4. It makes the most sense to me. It's the movie with the face-off against Darth Vader at the very end, with of course Darth Vader deciding, you know what, the dark side's not for me, man. I'm gonna throw Emperor Palpatine off the rail right here. I could imagine that Sora would first of all wake up in the desert of Tatooine, being confused initially, possibly thinking, is this Agrabah, coming across Luke in the desert, who is on his way to Jabba's palace. Luke and Sora then being chucked into the Rancor pit, and you have to face off against the Rancor and defend Luke, as he doesn't have his lightsaber at that point while he's trying to figure out how to get out of the pit itself. Moving over to then the group being captured once again and being sent off to the Dune Sea to be eaten alive. This could be a really cool segment with Boba Fett trying to shoot you. You have to obviously fight off a bunch of guards. Sora could use his keychain grapple to grapple from one ship to another, then inevitably blow up Jabba's ship, then escaping off to Yoda's swamp. I would imagine that Luke would probably be the primary party member for a Star Wars world, so I can only imagine that Sora would probably stick close to Luke's side throughout the ongoing story of the film. this would mean that, yeah, you go off to Yoda's swamp with Luke in the ship. But I can imagine if that was the setup, Sora reminiscing about his time with Donald and Goofy in the Gummy Ship within the oceans between, going off into space and exploring different Disney worlds. Similar fashion to what's going on here. Sora's in a ship, he's in space. Probably making comments like, this is not like the ship I'm usually used to, but this is really neat. And Sora being next to Luke during the Yoda death scene, with Yoda sort of talking to Luke about how he's come a long way but must face off against Darth Vader, possibly making a comment towards Sora that he sees great potential within him, his power possibly mirroring that of something like a Jedi. I could totally imagine too that in a moment like this, when Yoda passes, Sora saying something along the lines to Luke of, "Don't worry, they're not gone forever. Their hearts will always be connected to yours, no matter what. Yoda will always be by your side." You know, yada yada yada, hearts connected and all that. And then eventually making your way over to Endor, which would be the bulk of the world for Kingdom Hearts 4, as most of the film takes place on Endor. Inevitably to then find yourself in front of both Darth Vader as well as Emperor Palpatine, helping Luke take down both of these guys, with of course the face-off between Luke and Darth Vader, and then of course Darth Vader putting aside the dark side to help Luke out to then chuck Emperor Palpatine over the rail. Yeah, it would be beautiful. And to see those sort of interesting comparisons between both of the game's themes sort of, I guess, diverging into one would make a lot of sense. I'd also love that whole thing of, you know how in Kingdom Hearts 1 the Disney villains were given the power to summon forth the Heartless? I would love that to return for Kingdom Hearts 4, to make it seem like the villains in each Disney world play more of an important role that somehow integrates into the main story that is going on behind the scenes of all these different Disney properties you're visiting. To have more of those interactions with the main antagonist of that said Kingdom Hearts game, or a certain group, with the actual Disney villains of each world. So Emperor Palpatine, let's say for example, is in cahoots with one of the foretellers, which maybe one of the foretellers have ended up bestowing some of their powers to that of Emperor Palpatine, to possibly call upon beings like the Heartless, or maybe nobodies or unversed, to bring them forth and fight for him. Something like Heartless droids or Heartless stormtroopers really would be quite sick. Also, the dynamic between both Luke and Sora would be really cool, as they do have quite a few different similarities in their personality and similar goals in mind, trying to fight for someone that they care about and protecting their friends, the ones that matter. Also, when I think of like the relationship that Xehanort and Terra have to that of the relationship that Emperor Palpatine and Anakin have, it's extremely similar. Like, Xehanort, of course, manipulated Terra into using the darkness so that inevitably he would fall to darkness, so that he would become a Xehanort vessel, in similar fashion to Emperor Palpatine and Anakin. Anakin was manipulated into using his hatred to harness the power of the dark side. Of course, I think that, like Darth Vader, Anakin was doing things a little bit more knowingly compared to Terra. Terra was just a straight up goofball in the situation. But as of course we know that Sora knows the fall of Terra, and also experiencing others too that he's come across along his journey falling to that of darkness, I think the end portion of, let's say, Return of the Jedi would be very relatable for Sora, seeing how Darth Vader turned to the dark side, but in the end there, finally putting it to the side and actually returning to that of light. And let's all be 180% honest with ourselves. We have, for the longest time, wanted a lightsaber keyblade, just plain and simple. And if Star Wars gets in as a world, you absolutely know that the keychain you'll acquire from this world will turn the keyblade into a lightsaber keyblade. It will officially be canon to have a lightsaber. Yeah, this needs to happen. By the way, the simply incredible custom Kingdom Hearts 3 lightsaber keyblade mod is created by Dallin and Lightsaber. If you guys want to check this out for yourselves, I'll leave the link in the description down below. Just like in Kingdom Hearts 3 with Frozen though, you can almost guarantee that if Star Wars does get into Kingdom Hearts 4, a lot of the game's budget will end up being spent on specifically that one world. It was so clear with the Frozen Arendelle world of KH3 that a large portion of the game's budget ended up going onto that world. it is by far the biggest world that appears within the game. Caribbean was pretty big, but I'm meaning in raw size of how much attention to detail went into the world and just the world's length in the ways of the story, on top of also getting a very lengthy CG cutscene that of course is to do with the Let It Go song. Yeah, it was obvious a lot of the game's budget went into Arendelle. The same will likely be said for Star Wars. Totally not a bad thing. I think that's sort of what makes sense. It's the property that should probably get the most attention out of any other additional property that gets added into the game. You want to make sure that property gets executed right. I just do hope that Star Wars gets executed a little better compared to how Arendelle was executed Kingdom Hearts 3. I think part of the reason as to why I've always been a little bit off-put about the outer Disney properties getting into Kingdom Hearts and serving as worlds is that I feel like to a degree it would be breaking Kingdom Hearts immersion, as the worlds have either always been original Kingdom Hearts worlds or primarily Walt Disney Animation worlds, or of course now in Kingdom Hearts 3 Pixar. Those to us make sense. But now that Sora's found himself in a completely different reality altogether, that reality doesn't necessarily have to follow the same rules that his known reality follows. So seeing worlds that take after Disney's outer properties like Star Wars or Marvel or literally anything else, to me doesn't feel as immersion breaking as if these worlds were included into Kingdom Hearts previously. Now, from a lore standpoint, it kind of makes sense to start seeing something like a Star Wars world pop up, and for it to not feel totally strange. So guys, that's my big video on Star Wars. I've been wanting to sit down and talk about Star Wars for a little while now, sort of get my opinion out into the mix, considering that quite a few years back, I was totally against this idea of having outer properties, more so specifically Star Wars, to be included into Kingdom Hearts, but I've warmed up to the idea. I think that enough of the heads at Square Enix, along with Tetsuya Nomura, could make for a really, really intriguing world to diverge both themes of, you know, Kingdom Hearts and Star Wars together really well. And I think that this could probably be one of the coolest worlds we'll ever get in a Kingdom Hearts game. So let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, guys. However, dudes, I'm Cynical. Hopefully you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.